Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into a couple of questions that we're watching as we head into spring, head into summer, and then obviously into fall camp. A lot of different things to watch. Some transfer quarterbacks that just have to be huge, including John Mateer over at Oklahoma. Some sleepers that I'm watching very closely. Washington may be the chief among them, and a couple of guys over there in Columbus that just got to step up huge with all those guys going off to the NFL. But moving right along here, we got some teams to watch. Some teams that are really, really pressure filled as they head into 2025, maybe because they had some tough years in 2024, maybe because they seem to be all systems go for a national title in 2025. And I think when you talk about this, you got to start with the team in State College. I think when you talk about teams that are under the most pressure going into 2025, Penn State's probably number one. When you talk about returning Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, returning a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and then you got the quarterback, where a lot of teams around the country, you'll look at Texas, you'll look at Georgia, you'll look at Ohio State, you'll look at Oregon, all of them are introducing new quarterbacks to their system. Penn State is not. A very, very talented kid that, yes, did have some tough moments in the last couple of years, but obviously understands the offense very, very well, and it will be a really, really incredible thing for them to have their guy very much set. Now, all of this being said, I think James Franklin has the best roster and the best staff that he's ever had, in my opinion. When you add a guy like Jim Knowles, when you add some of the pieces they have to the wide receiver room and Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross, who just have to hit throughout spring, and definitely another thing to watch there. But overall, when you go into 2025, I don't think you can just win one game. I don't think you can just beat Ohio State. I don't think you can just beat Oregon. I don't think you can just win the Big Ten. I think you got to do some more damage. I don't think you can just beat Iowa State, let's say, in the Cotton Bowl just to lose to Texas in the Rose Bowl in the semifinal. Just a hypothetical there. But overall, you got to win multiple games. You got to show that you're not only making a step forward, but multiple steps forward, because this team is talented enough. They have the quarterback, they have the coordinators, they have so many things in place that could really make them successful that if they don't hit in 2025, I don't know how long it's going to be until they have a better shot. Now, Penn State's always going to be talented. It's not to say that if they don't win a title this year, they won't win for the next 50, but it is to say this is a very, very talented team, a very talented coaching staff, and you miss out on 2025, it might be a while before you get that really, really good shot again. Oh, excuse me, 2 seconds here. There we are. It's staying in the Big Ten. You got to go back to Michigan. I think this is a team that had a setback a year ago and overall didn't do anything too terrible. You know, it had a tough year. Obviously lost a ton of players, so was bound to happen. A ton of coaches left, a ton of off the field stuff that we can talk about on another date. But overall, they had a ton of things happen. They're also losing a ton of guys on defense when you talk about Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on the interior, two elite running backs with Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, and they're breaking in a freshman quarterback. Probably breaking in a freshman quarterback with Bryce Underwood. There will be a lot of pressure for this team, and they go to Norman in week 2, so they'll get a chance to deal with John Mateer and the Sooners in week 2, and we'll see what they can do. They go to Lincoln in week 4, and that'll be a really interesting one, but they avoid Penn State. They avoid Oregon, Illinois, and Indiana. They have the ability to be in the CFP conversation. Now, you're putting a lot on the shoulders of a freshman, there's no doubt about that, but Michigan wants to be in national title conversations, and Sharon Moore's made that very clear by the way he speaks and the way he's recruited on the trail. Has done an incredible job. It's time to get back up to the top, and I think it's going to be a freshman quarterback that probably has to lead you there, but very talented kid. I think this team has everything in front of them, and very navigable schedule to get this thing going with Bryce Underwood at quarterback. Texas is always going to be under pressure. That's never going to not be the case going forward, especially now that Steve Sarkisian has shown what they can do, and that is win a national title. Only a couple of plays away from being in that national title game with Notre Dame this year. The year before that, almost played Michigan for that national title in 2023. But the reality is, I do think this is the next team that you look at and said, who's going to win the next national title, who's going to be the next coach to win the national title. I think a lot of people look towards Steve Sarkisian in Texas. I think a lot of people look up towards Dan Lanning, and we'll talk about him plenty throughout the next couple of weeks, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in 2025, because I think 2024 was a remarkable rebuilding job. You had 11 guys drafted in the NFL, 2 guys on the interior of that defensive line that were downright incredible for you. The reality is you're probably going to have to do even more of that this year. You have two remarkable wide receivers, leaving you even more than that. Remarkable wide receivers, Gunnar Helm leaving at tight end, and then obviously Quinn Ewers, a huge piece for this team over the last couple of years on and off the field. Arch Manning will be taking over, and it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. He's going to have to be able to get this thing rolling in. I think this is the year where Texas really proves that they're not going anywhere. I think 2024 was a great indicator of how good this team can be, how greatly they can replace talent, but you still had your quarterback. You still had some big-time pieces that Jahdae Barron on the defensive side of the ball was massive for that team throughout the last year. Can you replace it again? Can you do it one more time around and do a little bit more replacing than you had to do a year ago? It'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Obviously, Arch Manning will have as much pressure as just about any first-year starting quarterback has ever had, but Texas is going to be right there with them, and they're going to have to be at least in the national title conversation, get back to the CFP, and then maybe 2026 is the national title year, but I think you got to show that you're not going anywhere, that you will be in the CFP conversation pretty much regardless of how many guys get drafted to the next level. The team they lost to in the SEC Championship, Georgia, just has to get right in 2025. Georgia was not classic Georgia in 2024. They had execution issues. The run game was mediocre at best, inconsistencies all the time. They dropped the ball as much as anyone in the entire country. They brought in some reinforcements at that wide receiver position, bringing in Zachariah Branch, bringing in Noah Thomas, two remarkably talented guys and two very different players, which really helps what Georgia does. I think Zachariah Branch can bring a little bit element to this offense that just hasn't been there in the past. A little bit more of that gadget type thing that I think Glad McConkey was incredible at, that they even used Brock Bowers for a couple of times. I think Zachariah Branch brings that back to Athens just a little bit. The reality is you got to get back in the run game. You got to get that going in the right direction, especially with Gunnar Stockton going start to finish throughout this year. At least I assume it will be Gunnar Stockton. You got to help him out with the run game. He will help you out in the run game, of course, but at the end of the day, this is a team that wants to be setting the pace in the SEC and nationally. It's going to be a huge pressure-filled season, and we'll talk about the off-the-field issues that don't help that one bit. So we'll talk about that in the next segment, but this is obviously a pressure-filled team, and if they don't bounce back in the ways that we know Georgia to be, it might be a little bit of time to worry going forward in Athens. Then you got Miami, the team that Carson Beck found his way down to, and there are some off-the-field things that we will not address on here, I'll be totally honest, but it'll be a very interesting thing to watch throughout spring. This team in general, Carson Beck will come back into the mix. He will play good football. I can't promise that he's going to play great football. Last year was obviously very up and down for him, but he's going to be a talented guy. The defense is an issue. The defense was a huge issue last year. It was the real only reason that they weren't in the CFP, that they weren't maybe even competing for a national title, much like that LSU team in 2023. But Corey Heatherman comes in from Minnesota, very talented coordinator, definitely a guy that can get the boys going, and the talent level will obviously be a little bit higher down in Coral Gables than it was up there in Minnesota, but they should be in the ACC title race. They should be playing for a CFP spot. They probably should have been doing that this past year. Now, they were in that conversation, obviously deep into the season, but let that kind of slip away very quickly against Syracuse. They got to get that defense figured out. And then you got to replace guys like Xavier Restrepo, Isaiah Horton, all those guys on the outside with guys like JoJo Trader, Nye Carr, and it'll be really interesting to watch. On top of all of that, if Carson Beck isn't fully all the way ready, Emory Williams better be ready to roll, and that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch throughout spring. But Miami's got to deliver. If they don't deliver in 2025, I think a lot of people down in Coral Gables will be doubting if Mario Cristobal can ever break through down there. Then you got Clemson. Clemson is a team that I would put probably right behind Penn State when you talk about a run-it-back category, a team that's getting back a lot of real talent that maybe forego the draft, maybe didn't, but overall, Clemson's getting back a lot of veteran talent. Obviously, Cade Klubnik at quarterback, the two wide receivers that are not quote-unquote veteran talent, but Bryant Westgo and TJ Moore are just beasts that are going into their sophomore season. Antonio Williams is a huge piece to this, obviously, and then on defense, you got Sammy Brown, that was the name I was looking for. Very talented get out there. Ashton Hampton on the back end is incredible. Avion Terrell as well. So they got plenty of talent. They hired two coordinators from outside their comfort zone. Definitely not something that Dabo's been known to do. They picked up a couple of portal guys. they're getting a little different down there in Clemson, South Carolina, and at some point they're going to have to hit. I think this year is about as good of an opening as you're possibly going to have. Now, the ACC around them is going to be plenty talented, and it will be plenty of teams like Louisville, like Georgia Tech, like SMU, like Miami that will be trying to knock them off that pedestal, obviously, but when you have Cade Klubnik, when you have those wide receivers on the outside, and when you have a run game that I think is going to be really, really good with Jay Haynes kind of leading the way there, I think this team should be firmly in the CFP. And I think if they're not, then the concerns about Dabo will get very, very loud once again, as they have pretty much around this time every year, but this past one, really. And then Alabama. You got to find your way back up to the top. I know Kalen DeBoer had a very interesting year in his first year, and I think a lot of that was kind of out of his control in some different ways. I think Jalen Milroe, they were remarkably reliant on his ability. He had to make just about every play, and the reality was you're not benching Jalen Milroe. You're not doing that on that team, because we saw how that team reacted when they played USF a couple of years back. Was not good without Jalen Milroe at quarterback. He is the outright leader of that team, and you just have to have him on the field. That being said, you move forward without Jalen Milroe now, and you got to find the right guy. I think there's a lot of different people that say Ty Simpson will be the quarterback. I know Austin Mack is making a huge impression throughout spring camp thus far, and then Keelan Russell is coming in as a very talented freshman. Broke down that one as well, gave my pick for who I think is going to win that one. Maybe not the person that you're expecting, but overall, go check that out if you would like to. But overall, I think this is a really good team. This is a very talented team. They have plenty of guys coming back on the defensive side of the ball. Deontay Lawson will still be holding it down in the center of that defense. They will have the ability to get back to the CFP, and if they don't, the sky might just be falling in Tuscaloosa. Now, I don't want to say that Kalen DeBoer is coaching for his job next year, because I think 9-3, I think he's fine. I think they move forward to 2026 feeling okay, at least, about where they're heading to. But there's a reality here where if Alabama doesn't hit, then those fans get antsy in a hurry. I'm just saying it very honestly, and the reality is I think Kalen DeBoer will get them back to that level, but there's a lot of teams in the SEC that would love to see them stay at that 9-3, maybe even a little bit worse of a record going into 2025. And this is one of those teams. LSU is the last team I have on here in in terms of pressure-filled teams, and they were Miami in 2023. Jaden Daniels, 2 elite receivers, wasted with a terrible defense. That was the reality of the 2023 season. Made the change at coordinator, brought in Blake Baker from Missouri, and got better throughout 2024. Did a lot of really, really nice things, especially in that back end. A lot of guys played a little bit more a little bit better than they had early on in the year. But it wasn't enough. They're going to have to find a way to get a little bit more out of that defensive side of the ball. Now, bringing in guys like Jack Pryburn, like Patrick Payton, like all of the guys they brought on in the back end, like Jakeem Jackson and a number of other players, they're going to be very talented. There's no doubt about that. Garrett Nussmeier, Aaron Anderson, and a ton of other guys coming back. Harold Perkins finding his way back to Baton Rouge. This is a huge opportunity for LSU. If they do not make a CFP run in 2025, if they are not one of the 12 teams in the CFP, I think Brian Kelly's in trouble. I'll be totally honest. I don't think you can have a quarterback like Garrett Nussmeier, have the weapons that he's going to have in Barry and Brown coming in from Kentucky, and Nick Anderson coming in from Oklahoma, and so many other guys that are going to be incredible players. You got to find a way to the CFP. That should be the expectation for this team. I think a lot of fans expect that, and they very well should. And if they don't get there, I think Brian Kelly's got to be a little bit nervous when he's walking around Baton Rouge, because I don't necessarily think his job is super safe if they don't make a CFP run in 2025. But a lot of those teams will have plenty to say about what goes on in 2025, and it'll be really interesting to watch all of these teams. One of those teams I just named will fall on their face. We've shown that over the last couple of years. It happens in the portal era where maybe you lean a little bit too much on it and it gets a little bit hairy, like it happened with Florida State last year. Maybe there's one of those teams in that group. Maybe there will be in the next slate of groups that I put out there. But overall, there's going to be a lot of teams that are super pressure-filled. I think when you talk about a certain player, Arch Manning over there in Austin has to bear a lot of that weight, but Miami's got to get back up to the top. LSU's got to find a way to get to the CFP, and so many other guys that might be in a little bit of trouble when it comes to job security if they don't find a way to the top of the sport in 2025. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's just catch up on all the headlines that we didn't have a chance to get to or just haven't had a chance to talk about throughout the last couple of days. We'll obviously start with UGA. We'll get into Troy Taylor being let go by Stanford. We'll talk about some of the spring game stuff and a couple other things right after this, so stick with us.